tap, tap. Really fast dashes. Just slide your fingers like this. Hello and welcome to another NihongoGamer video. So excited because you may remember this, the Victrix Pro FS, easily the most desirable arcade fight stick of the PS4 generation. It was the stick that everybody wished they had, but now with the PS5, the next generation is about to begin in more ways than one. What we have in this absolutely gargantuan box is the latest product from Victrix. It's the Pro FS-12 all-button controller, and what that means is that it doesn't have a lever like traditional arcade sticks. Now before you go and panic, don't worry, Victrix is making a new version of this, the Pro FS, but on the all-button controller, you won't have a lever, and that means you can't make the mistake of accidentally pressing down right when you were trying to press right. Now there are so many reasons why you should expect the next generation of fighting game players to be using all-button controllers like these, but before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get it out the box. I'm just gonna move the Pro FS a little further back. Let's get it out of the shipping packaging. All right, let's just get this out of the plastic bag. There it is, the box for the Victrix Pro FS all-button controller. Now this is the black and white edition that Victrix has sent me for the purposes of this video, but don't worry, all opinions are my own. There is also going to be a purple version coming. Let's just spin this around and have a look at the back of the box. This is only the outer packaging. It looks like this sleeve actually comes off a black box underneath. Now we're looking at the main packaging for the Victrix Pro FS-12, and that slick Victrix logo on the front. This product was only just announced at EVO, the biggest fighting game tournament in the world, a few months ago, and so this is easily one of the most highly anticipated controllers of the year. Feast your eyes on the Victrix Pro FS-12. It's still in its bag. Victrix 4 years later, and you hit me with the mix-up again. It's not the controller, it's just the inner packaging. Look how slick this bag is. Oh, it's white. This is the first time I think I've seen a white Victrix controller. Feast your eyes on what I think is the world's first PlayStation officially licensed all-button controller. We have it now! This thing is absolutely gorgeous to see in person. It has that super solid aluminium construction, but with that matte finish that they've been putting on the later Victrix Pro FS sticks. It still has the purple handles on the back, and wait for it, it does have non-slip padding all over the bottom. Easily one of the most overlooked important functions of an arcade stick. Before we look at anything else, let's get rid of this plastic. Now, of course, there is no stick on this all-button controller, and I believe all of these are Sanwa buttons. Let's give them a test. Feels pretty good. And you've got 24mm buttons for all of these 11 here, and then one 30mm button here, which is used for up. And super helpfully, unlike most all-button controllers that I've seen, it actually has labels for the directions. But just to compare this to the original Victrix Pro Fight Stick, side by side you can see they are more or less the exact same size, they are more or less the exact same thickness. Design-wise, the Pro FS-12 is identical to the original Pro FS. They've even given me all the changes that they made in the second version of the Pro FS, like having a touchpad here that's going to make it so much easier to reset the stage in things like training mode when you're playing fighting games. But the aluminium construction, the matte paint finish, the touchpad, the Sanwa buttons, and the openable door at the back, it looks like it's pretty much the same design as the original Pro FS. But the one thing that I really want to know is, does it still have that satisfying clunk? Yes! Now, if you're completely lost and you've never seen a controller like this before, I'll be explaining it all in the second part of the video, but essentially, you've got left, down, right over here, and you've got a jump button which you can press with your left thumb, or you can press it with your right thumb, like this. Having the direction buttons split up into discrete buttons like this opens up the possibilities to so many things like shortcuts, but just also the ability to press buttons so much more precisely than if you're using an arcade stick for the reasons I mentioned before. Now, as you can see here on the back, it's got a USB-C port, and the cable is here. It doesn't get stored on the inside of the case. It actually gets wrapped around these horns on the top of the stick. So this is the braided cable that you get with the Victrix Pro FS-12. I'm going to plug the USB-C side into the port here at the top. And let's just wind this cable around like so. But if you don't like the look of the cable being wrapped around these horns at the top, you can just remove the cable entirely and just put it in your bag separately. Okay, the PS5 is on. Let's see if the flashing lights come on for the controller. Yes! So we've got the buttons lit up, telling you exactly what their functions are here in purple, but I believe that you can change the color. And as you can see, we've got lights on the left side and lights on the right side. Here we go. We've got light colors phasing between all the different colors of the rainbow that they've chosen for the Pro FS-12. If I press it again, it switches them off. But when I press buttons, oh yeah, we got the light show going. When you're playing at a tournament and that tournament is being streamed on the internet for the whole world to see, you want everyone to know that your controller is the most bling possible. And now the lights are on, you can see that this is absolutely a controller that is designed to be native for the PS5. It's even got the share icon, which was changed for the PS5. Listen up, it's time to put the Pro FS-12 through its paces. If you don't know why this controller is so exciting, it's because 1, it's super luxurious, but 2, I believe this is the first all-button controller that we've ever had that is officially licensed. So you don't need to wait for third-party companies to update their firmware or come out with special PCBs to upgrade their boards to work with the PS5. This works with PS5 out the box, and I don't think there are any other controllers that do that yet. I am beyond excited, so let's not waste any more time. Let's boot up some PS5 fighting games and test the Victrix Pro FS-12. Alright, so I've got the Victrix braided purple cable here, plug the USB-C end into the controller. We should see some lights come on. There, we've got it. I'm just going to leave it on purple for now. I think it goes really well with the white and black theme. If you've got a controller that's not officially licensed, then when you click on PS5 here, it will give you a warning sign, but just to show you, it does boot up straight into the PS5 version of the game. No problem. Guilty Gear Strive. Now just to show you the difference, if I put the Victrix away and I plug in the controller that I made myself, when I try to boot into a PS5 game like so, it should give me a warning saying that PS5 games can't be played on the current controller. You can see the warning sign in the corner. Alright, and now we are in training mode and I've got the FS-12. Let's just test some buttons. I'll press left, I can go left, press right, I can go right, press down and jump. And the things that we need to check to make sure that this controller is actually tournament legal, because it's officially licensed, but that's not to say that it's actually tournament legal. If we press left and right at the same time, we should get neutral, and if we press down and up, we should consistently get an up input. Now, if you've never seen that before, basically it's called SOCD, and it only really relates to controllers where the D-pad is split into separate buttons, because now that you can press simultaneously opposing directions, if you don't have the PCB set up correctly, then sometimes you can get the most recent button in, so that doing this will always go straight to the most recent input. For an all-button controller like this to be tournament legal, all it needs to do is make sure that pressing opposing directions, left and right, always results in neutral, and pressing down and up always results in up. Now, there has actually been some recent discussion as to whether this is fair. Maybe down and up should also result in neutral, but that's to be decided in the future. For now, the SOCD rules that are built into this controller are tournament legal, and in fact, the controller that was used to win EVO in 2022 was based on an all-button controller using this exact rule set. So let's just pop into the game and just see how the controller feels. I mean, the first thing I'm noticing is that the buttons, I haven't actually played on an all-button controller that just uses Sanwa buttons. I know that seems like quite a standard thing, but all the controllers I've used have either had gamer finger buttons or they've had custom buttons that are made by the controller maker. As you can see, I've got my punches, slashes, heavy slashes, I've got fireballs, I've got dragon punches, and now that I'm stuck in the corner and I want to reset the stage, I can use the all-important touchpad button, which is built into this stick. Just press the button there. So as you can see, it's good to have a touchpad built in. The very first version of the Victrix Pro didn't actually have this giant touchpad on it, and so resetting the stage was a little bit of a faff. But so far, so good. Pressing all the buttons, they all feel pretty nice. Just take my headphones off for a second so I can test how loud they are. Oh yeah, it is that classic, Victrix Pro loudness. When I made my original video for the Victrix Pro FS, I actually had headphones on most of the time, and so I didn't notice just how loud a stick this is. But this uses Sanwa buttons on an aircraft aluminium grade body. Fortunately, I have a bunch of gamer finger buttons, so I'll probably swap those in because they're much much quieter. This is actually a tournament switch, so it'll actually go red to show you that it's in tournament mode. I can press the options button to open up the menu, and that would be terrible in the middle of a tournament because you would lose the match. But if I put the tournament switch on and it's red, then when I go into the game, pressing the options button does nothing, and it keeps me safe from accidentally disqualifying myself. Now, one thing you may have noticed on this controller is that there are no L3 or R3 buttons on the top here. All we have is this Pro button. If I press R, then this Pro button gets set to be R3. And this time, if I press the L button, like this, it gets set to L3. So when I'm in the game here, pressing the Pro button now, we'll set it to the left stick. Now, the reason you've only got an L3 or an R3 button set here is because they put the touchpad here and it's massive. So unfortunately, there are actually fewer buttons available to you than on the version 1 of the Victrix Pro FS. And let's say I want to record with L3 and say play with R3. Unfortunately, I don't have access to that because I have to choose between whether play is L3 or record is L3. I can't have an R3 button as well. So that's just a minor inconvenience that I want to point out. All right, let's just try a combo out in the mission mode. All right, seems to work just fine. A couple of things you can do on a controller like this are slidey motions, because you've got these Sanwa buttons, and because they are so light to the touch and they're also quite low, they're low enough profile that you can slide your fingers over the buttons to do various things. Basically, it is entirely possible to miss the down input in a half circle motion, because if you roll your hands the wrong way, you might go from down forward to down back without ever getting just the down input. And so if you just slide your fingers like this, you can get a really fast forward, down, back input. I think it kind of skips the diagonals, but in modern fighting games like Guilty Gear Strive, they don't really care about the diagonals. All they really want to see is the forward, the down, and the back input. And because it might cause some controversy that I showed you something that's quite easy to do on a controller like this, just know that it's not really as easy to do on the second player's side. You'd have to like swipe your fingers and then jump back to the left side. Let's have a look at this super nice rest area for your wrist. Now, I really liked this wrist area on the original Victrix Pro FS, the fight stick, but here on an all-button controller, I actually usually advise against people putting your wrists on here, because as you can see, once you've locked your wrists in place, you're relying on far fewer muscles and a lot of locked in place tendons, which I think if you're not careful, you can end up causing yourself a little bit of injury. But my personal advice, and this won't work for everyone, is that you kind of hover your fingers above the buttons, or at very least, just rest them lightly on the buttons. So things are looking pretty good for the Victrix Pro FS-12, but it's time to try out some other games now. Just while we're going through the 1-hour process that is booting up Street Fighter V on a PlayStation, you can actually see there is a little switch here, and on that switch, it actually says PS4, PS5, PC. Alright, I've got Street Fighter V booted up now, and actually the main reason I've turned this game on is to show you very specific things that kind of only work in games like Street Fighter V. The first thing is that a lot of people give up on Street Fighter because they just can't do the Dragon Punch motion, and I don't blame them. On an arcade stick, you can kind of miss some of the directions because you're going from a forward motion to a neutral to a down forward motion, but on a button box controller, it's very, very simple. You just go forward, down, forward. It's just those 3 discrete inputs, and you should get the Dragon Punch like this. The thing about the Dragon Punch is that on the second player's side, now you have to use your ring finger, and if you've never used a controller like this before, doing a Dragon Punch motion with your ring finger is, in my opinion, significantly more difficult than doing it with your index finger, because your index finger is just a faster, more independent appendage than your ring finger is. Something you can do specifically in Street Fighter V is, instead of the forward, down forward motion for the Dragon Punch, you can actually do a forward, down up motion, and that will still count as a Dragon Punch. Again, this is one of those things which is part of the discussions regarding whether this controller is actually fair in a fighting game. But as you can see, all I do is forward, down up, and the punch button, and I'll get a Dragon Punch. So long story short, all of your standard shortcuts do work. Things like pressing forward and then tapping the back buttons to do really fast dashes. If you want to do a super combo and down forward, down forward punch is too many buttons for you, you can just go forward and then go tap, and you can get a super doing that. And once again, we find ourselves in the corner. Let me just show you how the touchpad can be used to reset the training stage. If you press it here, it'll send us back to the middle of the stage. Tap on the left side to go to the left of the screen. And of course, if you press on the right side of the touchpad, you end up on the right side of the screen. Let's just try our bog standard combo here. Seems to be no issues. Now I'll tell you one thing that feels a little bit strange about this controller is if you have a good look at it, you can see that the jump button is actually not perfectly in the middle. I sat it down and I put my fingers here and they actually landed very naturally here to the sides of the buttons, and actually I had to slide my hands over just, you know, it's only like 2 or 3 millimeters, but it feels significant enough that you notice it. And so depending on your blood type, you may find that you want the whole controller to be a little bit to the left instead of sitting right in the middle. So honestly, I don't think it's going to be an issue for most people, but personally, because I always build my own controllers with the jump button right down the center, it felt really weird to me to be like 2 or 3 millimeters off to the side. Now the next 2 points I want to make are both about the layout of the buttons on this controller. You may have noticed that this is using a Victrix style layout instead of the Noir style layout. Now if you're playing on an arcade stick, you're free to have your hand shifted out like this, so you've got access to all of the buttons at the same time on a Victrix layout. But on an all button controller, you're kind of locked in place. You can't really move too far away from where the thumb stays here. And so once you're in place to press these 3 buttons here and your thumb like this, you can see that your pinky very naturally ends quite low after the R1 button, which is why most of these all button controllers, you find that these final 2 buttons are usually sunk down a little bit, like so. You've got better access to them even when your thumb is right here. Now the last point I want to make is with regards to this wrist rest. Now normally it's actually quite nice to have a wrist rest. Your hands are quite loose when you're playing on an arcade stick, but on an all button controller, like I was saying, your hands are locked in place and already you don't have a lot of freedom of movement. And so the last thing you want to do is also lock your wrists in position, because then all of the motion is coming from your fingers and these tendons like this. So point number 1, I don't think we actually need this wrist rest, but point number 2 is that because there is a wrist rest, I can't bring the controller closer to me. If I were to show you the controller that I built myself, this was out of like a $5 piece of plastic. The point I'm trying to make is I shifted all the buttons as low as I possibly could so I can get it as close as I want to. And as a result, when I'm playing on this controller that I built, I can have it right up against my stomach and I can have my arms like this. And if I just zoom out, you can see that now I've got my arms actually angled back a little bit so that I'm not having my arms out like this, because if you've ever tried to hold your arms out like this for a long period of time, you'll know that it starts to hurt after only a few seconds, and certainly maybe a minute of holding your arms out like this is really going to hurt. But with the 4 or 5 inches of wrist rest that you see here, I can still get it decently close enough to me that my arms don't really hurt and I can still press all the buttons, and I don't think after a long time it's going to hurt, but just in case, do check out future videos that I make when I update and let you know exactly how it feels to play over time. Just know that my initial preference would be for a controller to have the buttons as close as possible to the base. In fact, if you have a look here, it's actually really cramped by the touchpad. For whatever reason, they've shoved them all the way up to the point that the triangle is actually overlapping the area where the touchpad is. The only reason I can imagine that they did that is because they're using the same manufacturing process to make the Pro FS, the fight stick, as the all button controller. As you can see, now that we've got a jump button down here, we can't move this layout any lower down because then it goes into the angled part of the arcade stick, and that's actually where I believe they've got all the PCB and internal components. That's actually stored down there. If you had the main buttons on the flat part and you had the jump button on the angled part, that would be a no-go. Anyway, stay tuned for future videos and I'll keep you updated. For you magical unicorns who can rest your arms on the wrist rest without causing any pain, I'm envious of you. Just a few last things about the design of the controller. You do have a headset port. You can see there are some nice rubberized grips here that feel really nice, so you don't have to like hug your stick while waiting for your match at a tournament. As you can see, it is pretty cramped in this compartment, so some buttons probably won't fit. Just for science, let's actually unplug the controller right now and actually check and see whether our buttons will actually fit. Not all screw type buttons are going to have sleeves this slim. Just slam that in there. Okay, I think you can see there it is incredibly tight. There's like 0.5 millimeter space left. Anyway, I'll do a full video in the future where I actually swap out all the buttons and see how it feels. Listen, that's pretty much all I've got time for here with the Victrix Pro FS-12. As you can see, it is unbelievably desirable. This is the most luxurious arcade controller you can buy. It comes in at just under $400. It's $399, so it's quite pricey, but as a result, you get that Victrix build quality, the aircraft grade aluminum, you've got the built-in touchpad, you've got PS5 compatibility. Remember, this is the first officially licensed all-button controller for PlayStation, but there are a few things you should consider before you're buying it. First of all, this is significantly more expensive than other all-button controllers out there. At $399, you have to really love the build quality, the styling, and the PS5 compatibility and the official licensed aspect of this controller. Because absolutely, there are plenty of other controllers out there that are cheaper, but that's not who Victrix is going for. Victrix is like, if you want a controller that is expensive but doesn't cheap out on any aspect of the controller, it's built solidly, it's got premium parts, it's got cool features, it's got light up bells and whistles all over it, it's got a removable cable, it's got that satisfying clunk. Just had to do that again. This is not the controller for people like, that one's smaller, or that one's thinner, or that one works on a Nintendo Switch and an Xbox and a PlayStation, but it doesn't run on the PS5. This is the controller you buy if you're like, look, I don't mind spending extra money as long as it's the one that works. This is definitely the Lamborghini of the arcade sticks. Like, it doesn't really matter if a Ferrari is a practical car to drive around and do the grocery run. You buy an exotic high-performance sports car because everyone's going to wish that they were you with your FS-12. Now, it's not all perfect, and I do have a few criticisms of this controller. First of all, I don't personally think that it should have a wrist rest. I would much prefer if the whole control layout was brought a little bit lower. I do think it's a little bit cramped at the top, so if you're going to put in your own custom buttons, certain screw type mounts probably won't fit. It is slightly shifted to the right. I actually don't really know why that is, because it does appear that there's enough space for the whole thing to be shifted back into the center. I think instead of this Vuelix-ish layout here, I think it would be nicer if these final two buttons were a little bit lower and easier to access. And although it is really nice to have a full-size touchpad that you can press on the middle, left, or right sides of it, I do think that in 2022 we should have had a redesign where we can actually have an L3 and an R3 button. I don't think that's asking too much. And last but certainly not least, this is definitely still a loud stick. I think it is a little bit quieter than my original Victrix Pro FS, probably because it's got this matte paint finish. This is loud, but it's not that obnoxious. I think my very final concluding thought on the Victrix Pro FS-12 is that it shouldn't have made any compromises. Just like the Victrix Pro FS, it should have gone all out and made sure that this was the perfect controller that does everything you would want in an all-button controller. But having designed my own all-button controller and having used basically almost every other all-button controller out there, I have some strong opinions on this. I do think that this wrist rest is unnecessary, but as you can see, they couldn't move it any lower because it's using the same chassis as the Victrix Pro FS. So it feels like even though they may have wanted to make certain changes to the shape and layout of these things, maybe they just couldn't. And so in a way, it's a controller that shouldn't make any compromises. It's like, okay, $399, no compromises. This is the best you can get. But for some reason, unlike the original Victrix Pro, it does feel like it's had to make some compromises just because they needed to use the same manufacturing process to build these. But all that being said, it is absolutely still the most luxurious arcade controller that you can buy if you're looking for an all-button controller, and especially one that is officially licensed. So there you have it, the Victrix Pro FS-12. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to see more videos where I check out other arcade controllers and arcade sticks or pad controllers, be sure to subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on Twitter at NihongoGamer, and if you want to talk to other people who like controllers and other things that are discussed on this channel, you can join us on the NihongoGamer Discord. But is this what you're looking for? If you're in the market for an all-button controller, would you pick the Victrix Pro FS-12? Let me know in the comments section below. Like the video if you enjoyed it. That's all for now. I'll see you in the next NihongoGamer video.